To think like a billionaire investor is not to memorize strategies, chase exclusive deals, or imitate the visible behaviors of the ultra-wealthy, because those are merely the shadows cast by a far deeper mental architecture that governs how they perceive risk, time, value, and themselves. Billionaire investors do not operate with a superior appetite for money. They operate with a fundamentally different relationship to reality. Their thinking is shaped less by ambition and more by calibration, a constant effort to align decisions with how the world actually works, rather than how they wish it worked. The first and most decisive shift is how they define the game they are playing. Most people believe investing is about beating the market out, performing peers, or maximizing returns in the shortest possible time. Billionaire investors reject this framing entirely. They see investing as a lifelong process of capital preservation and intelligent deployment, where survival is the prerequisite for compounding, and compounding is the only force powerful enough to matter over decades. From this perspective, avoiding catastrophic loss is more important than capturing every opportunity, and patience becomes a strategic asset rather than a personality trait. This long-term orientation reshapes how they view opportunity. While others scan for what is exciting, new or popular billionaire investors look for what is durable, misunderstood, or temporarily mispriced. They are less interested in stories and more interested in structures. They ask whether a business asset or system can endure technological change, regulatory shifts, and human error. If durability is weak, upside is irrelevant. This structural thinking filters out the majority of noise before analysis even begins conserving attention for only a small number of meaningful decisions each year. Another defining characteristic is their obsession with downside. Billionaire investors do not ask how much they can make. They ask how much they can lose, under what conditions, and whether that loss is survivable without impairing future decision-making. They design portfolios and businesses with margins of safety that allow them to remain rational when others panic. This asymmetry-limited downside with open-ended upside is not accidental. It is engineered through conservative assumptions, diversification, where it matters, and concentration only, where understanding is deep. Equally important is how they treat uncertainty. Most people experience uncertainty as discomfort and rush to resolve it through action. Billionaire investors accept uncertainty as permanent. They do not seek false precision. Forecasts are treated as rough guides, not promises. Because they are comfortable not knowing, they are less likely to overcommit to fragile narratives. This comfort allows them to wait, observe, and act only when probabilities shift meaningfully in their favor, often appearing inactive while quietly preparing. Their thinking is also deeply probabilistic. Instead of binary judgments, good versus bad, win versus lose, they think in ranges and distributions. Every decision is viewed through expected value over time, not emotional conviction in the moment. This probabilistic mindset reduces ego involvement. Being wrong is not a personal failure. It is a statistical outcome. What matters is whether the process repeated consistently produces favorable results over many iterations. This is why billionaire investors focus relentlessly on process quality rather than short-term outcomes. A less visible but critical element is their relationship with ego. Billionaire investors work continuously to keep ego from contaminating judgment. They are wary of identity-driven decisions, investments made to prove intelligence status or courage. Markets punish this behavior mercilessly. Instead, they cultivate intellectual humility, surrounding themselves with people who challenge their thinking, and building systems that expose blind spots early. Confidence for them is conditional and revisable, never absolute. Time, perhaps more than money, is their most carefully allocated resource. Billionaire investors understand that attention is finite and easily squandered. They deliberately reduce the number of decisions they must make, automating delegating or eliminating anything that does not materially affect long-term outcomes. This simplification is not laziness, it is precision. By narrowing their focus, they preserve cognitive energy for decisions that genuinely move the needle, sometimes only a handful each year. Their learning process reflects this same depth. Rather than consuming endless streams of current information, they invest heavily in foundational knowledge, history, psychology, systems, thinking, and incentives. They study past cycles, not to predict exact outcomes, but to recognize familiar patterns of behavior under different guises. This historical grounding provides emotional stability when markets behave irrationally because nothing feels unprecedented. Familiarity breeds calm, and calm preserves judgment. Another subtle distinction lies in how they think about control. Billionaire investors do not overestimate their influence on outcomes. They separate what they can control, position sizing, diversification behavior, from what they cannot, market, sentiment, macro shocks, political events. Energy is spent only on the former. This stoic discipline prevents wasted effort and emotional exhaustion. When outcomes disappoint, they review process, not fate, and adjust accordingly without drama. Importantly, billionaire investors are not constantly active. In fact, inactivity is one of their most powerful tools. They understand that markets offer only occasional moments where risk and reward are misaligned enough to justify decisive action. The rest of the time doing nothing is not a failure, but a strategic choice. This selective aggression allows them to act with size and conviction when conditions are right, rather than diluting results through constant motion. Over years, this way of thinking compounds internally before it compounds financially. Judgment improves, emotional volatility decreases, and decision-making becomes cleaner. What outsiders interpret as intuition is often just pattern recognition, earned through sustained exposure and disciplined reflection. The billionaire investor appears calm, not because stakes are low, but because the mental framework is strong enough to carry them. Perhaps the most difficult aspect for others to accept is that billionaire thinking is often boring. There is little excitement, little urgency, and little drama. The work happens quietly, repeatedly, and without applause. This boredom is a feature, not a flaw. It signals that risk is understood, incentives are aligned, and nothing fragile is being forced to perform beyond its limits. And it is precisely here, where most people lose interest and start searching for shortcuts, that the real difference becomes visible. Because thinking like a billionaire investor is not about speed, brilliance, or boldness, but about discipline sustained over time, about building a mental system that resists emotion, noise, and social pressure. And once this system is in place, the question shifts from how to make money to how to avoid foolishness, how to protect optionality, and how to ensure that when rare high-quality opportunities finally appear, you are not distracted, over-leveraged, or psychologically compromised, but fully prepared to act with clarity and conviction. And it is from this unfinished thought where mindset gives way to application and philosophy begins to shape behavior that we must continue, because what comes next is not about theory, but about how this way of thinking translates into daily decisions, habits, and standards that quietly separate billionaire investors from everyone else. And it is at this exact point, mid-thought and intentionally unresolved, that the journey must move forward into the next part as the sentence continues. And this is where billionaire thinking descends from abstraction into lived behavior. Because once a mental framework is truly internalized, it begins to dictate standards automatically, without constant effort or motivation. daily decisions become quieter but sharper. Billionaire investors structure their day's environments and relationships to protect clarity rather than stimulate activity. They design friction against impulsive action and ease around disciplined behavior. This is why their routine schedules and even social circles often appear narrow from the outside. It is not isolation, it is filtration, a deliberate reduction of inputs so that signal can emerge from noise. In practical terms, this means they operate with fewer but higher quality decisions. They do not check prices obsessively because price alone rarely contains insight. They do not debate every opinion because most opinions are unanchored to incentives or evidence. Instead, they build simple rules that enforce long-term behavior, position size limits that cannot be overridden by excitement checklists that must be satisfied before capital is deployed, and review processes that focus on decision quality rather than outcome. These guardrails free them from relying on willpower, which they know is unreliable under pressure. Their habits reflect the same restraint. Learning is intentional, not compulsive. They read slowly, revisit foundational ideas, and spend time thinking without producing anything visible. Reflection is not a luxury, it is maintenance. By regularly revisiting past decisions, especially mistakes, they refine judgment incrementally. This feedback loop is private and honest, unpolluted by the need to appear correct. Over time, small improvements in judgment compound into a massive advantage because markets reward those who make slightly better decisions consistently, not those who occasionally make spectacular ones. Standards more than goals guide their behavior. Billionaire investors are not driven by daily targets or emotional milestones. They are guided by non-negotiables. Never risk, ruin. Never invest in what you do not understand. Never confuse activity with progress. Never compromise integrity for return. These standards act as a compass during uncertainty. When faced with complex choices, they do not ask what feels exciting or urgent, but what is consistent with their principles. This consistency reduces internal conflict and preserves long-term alignment. Another crucial translation of mindset into action is how they handle success. When outcomes are favorable, they do not extrapolate brilliance. They attribute gains to process environment and probability, and they remain alert to complacency. Success is treated as a potential risk because it can relax discipline and inflate ego. By maintaining skepticism toward their own victories, billionaire investors avoid the common trap of increasing risk just as conditions become less forgiving. Failure, conversely, is metabolized quickly. Losses are examined without self-punishment or denial. The question is not, why did this happen to me, but what signal did I miss, and was the process sound? If the process was sound, the loss is accepted. If it was flawed, the process is repaired. This emotional neutrality toward outcomes preserves psychological capital, which is just as important as financial capital, over decades of decision-making. Over long horizons, this way of thinking produces a distinct calm, not complacency, but steadiness. Billionaire investors are difficult to rush, frighten, or seduce because their reference point is internal. They do not need constant confirmation from markets or peers. This independence allows them to act decisively when others hesitate, and to wait patiently when others chase. Timing from the outside looks exceptional. From the inside, it feels obvious because the preparation has been ongoing. Eventually, thinking like a billionaire investor becomes less about investing and more about stewardship. Capital is seen as a tool, not a scorecard. Decisions are evaluated not only by return, but by durability impact and second-order effects. This maturity is rarely visible in headlines, but it defines the final stage of the mindset. Wealth in this frame is the byproduct of correct thinking, sustained over time, not the objective itself. And so the idea resolves where it began. To think like a billionaire investor is to align with reality, to respect uncertainty, to protect downside, and to let time do the heavy lifting. It is a way of thinking that favors survival over brilliance, process over prediction, and discipline over drama. Those who adopt it stop asking how to get rich quickly and start asking how to avoid being foolish repeatedly. When that shift occurs, compounding, both financial and personal, becomes almost inevitable. If this perspective has sharpened how you think about money decisions and time, I invite you to subscribe to the channel and continue walking this long-term path together, and leave a comment sharing which principle changed how you see investing or life itself. Because reflection turns understanding into wisdom, and wisdom practiced daily is what quietly separates those who chase wealth from those who eventually become worthy of carrying it.